All right, so we're diving deep today, right? We're going to get into something that's, well, it's pretty vital. You can't live without it, blood. But we're not just talking basic stuff here.
No, definitely not.
We got this source, we're calling it pasted text. And let me tell you some fascinating details in there.
Definitely
We're
fascinating.
going way beyond, just the basics, like what color it is. We're getting into the nitty-gritty of how blood works. It's really quite amazing.
It really is. And, most people, I think, don't realize how complex it really is.
Right. You just think, oh, it's red, it's in my veins, it's good to have.
Yeah, it keeps you alive.
But there's so much more to it. Okay, so first off, you were saying before we started recording that blood is actually a tissue. I mean, I always thought of it as like a liquid.
Yeah, I think that's the common misconception. You see it, it flows, it's definitely a liquid, but it's actually classified as a connective tissue.
Connective tissue, like
Oh.
tendons and ligaments.
Exactly. And what makes it a tissue is that it has cells and a matrix. So in the case of blood, the matrix is the plasma. That's the liquid part.
Okay, so the plasma is like the background, and
And you've got all these different types of cells floating around in it, each with its own special job to do.
so it's connecting things, even though it's fluid. Huh, interesting.
And another thing, just to add to that, is how thick it is. Like, blood is actually 5 times thicker than water.
5 times. Really? Wow. I guess that makes sense, though, when you think about everything it has to carry around.
Yeah, it's a busy highway in there. Speaking of which, we should talk about the functions of blood. Distribution, regulation, protection, it does it all.
It really is a multitasking marvel, isn't it? So let's break it down. First up, distribution. I mean, it's pretty obvious blood delivers oxygen, right?
Absolutely, that's one of its primary roles. From the lungs to every cell in your body, blood makes sure oxygen gets where it needs to go.
And it takes away the carbon dioxide, right? Like a waste removal service.
Exactly. It picks up the CO2 from the cells and transports it back to the lungs to be exhaled. But it's not just about gases. Blood also carries nutrients from the digestive system, hormones, and the endocrine glands. You name it, blood delivers it.
It's like a complex network of roads and delivery trucks, making sure everything gets where it needs to be. Amazing. And what about regulation? I know our source mentioned that blood helps maintain homeostasis.
Right. Homeostasis is all about keeping the body in balance. So blood plays a key role in regulating things like body temperature and pH.
Okay, so like when I get too hot, I sweat, and that cools me down.
Exactly. And blood helps transport heat from the core of your body to the skin where it can be released. Same with pH. Your blood needs to stay within a very narrow pH range, slightly alkaline, and blood helps buffer any fluctuations.
It's like a constant balancing act, making sure everything stays within those healthy limits.
Precisely. And then, of course, there's the protection function, which is probably one of the most fascinating aspects of blood.
Yeah, the immune system, that's where the white blood cells come in, right? Like little soldiers fighting off infections.
Absolutely. White blood cells are incredible. They're constantly patrolling, looking for anything that doesn't belong, and then they neutralize the threat.
Like bacteria and viruses.
Exactly. And they come in different types, each with its own specialized way of fighting invaders. And then you've got platelets, those tiny cell fragments that are crucial for clotting.
Right, clotting. So that's what stops us from bleeding out when we get a cut.
Exactly. Platelets rush to the site of the injury and form a plug to stop the bleeding. It's a really amazing and intricate process.
So we've talked about the amazing things blood does, but let's get into the nuts and bolts of it. What's actually in blood? What is it made of?
Well, blood is composed of two main parts, plasma and what we call formed elements.
Formed elements. That sounds kind of mysterious.
It's just a fancy way of saying the cells and cell fragments that are in blood. So you've got erythrocytes, leukocytes, and platelets.
Okay, let's break that down. Erythrocytes, those are the red blood cells, right?
You got it. Those are the ones that give blood its characteristic red color and carry oxygen throughout the body.
And there are a lot of them, right? I remember looking at blood under a microscope in high school, and it was just packed with red blood cells.
Oh yeah, there are a ton of them. About 250 million in a single drop of blood.
250 million in just one drop? That's mind-blowing.
It is. And their shape is actually really important for their function. They're biconcave, meaning they're kind of like a donut with a thin center that increases their surface area, allowing them to carry more oxygen.
So it's like they're designed to maximize oxygen carrying capacity.
Exactly. And they don't even have a nucleus, which frees up even more space for hemoglobin and the molecule that binds to oxygen.
It's like they're super specialized for this one job, carrying oxygen. Amazing. And what about leukocytes?
Leukocytes, those are the white blood cells, the stars of the immune system. And these are actually true cells with a nucleus and all the cellular machinery they need to function.
So they're more complex than red blood cells.
Yeah, they're the ones that actually recognize and attack foreign invaders like bacteria and viruses. There are different types of white blood cells, each with its own specialized way of fighting infection.
It's like a whole army in there. with different units specializing in different types of combat.
That's a great way to put it. And then we have the platelets, the tiny cell fragments that are essential for clotting.
Right, those are the first responders when we get a cut.
Exactly. They rush to the site of injury and form a plug to stop the bleeding. It's really an incredible process, very intricate and essential for survival.
So we've got all these different cells, each with its own unique job, but where do they all come from?
Well, all blood cells originate from a process called hematopoiesis, which takes place in your bone marrow.
Bone marrow, so that's where the magic happens.
It is. Hematopoiesis is a continuous process. Your body is constantly producing and destroying blood cells. Did you know that about 2 million red blood cells are produced every second?
2 million per second? Seriously, that's just wow. But how does the body know how many to make?
Well, the production of red blood cells and platelets is regulated by a negative feedback system. Basically, the body monitors oxygen levels, and if they get too low, it signals the bone marrow to produce more red blood cells.
So it's like a thermostat, keeping everything in check.
Exactly. White blood cell production, on the other hand, is more dynamic. It increases in response to infections, making sure there are enough white blood cells to fight off the invaders.
So it ramps up production when it senses a threat. That's so cool. And speaking of monitoring things, our source mentioned something called hematocrit. What's that all about?
Hematocrit is simply the percentage of your blood that's made up of red blood cells. It's a measurement that doctors use to assess your overall health.
So it's like a gauge for how well your blood is functioning.
That's a good way to put it. If your hematocrit is too low, it could be a sign of anemia, meaning you don't have enough red blood cells to carry oxygen efficiently.
And that's why people with anemia often feel tired and weak, right?
Exactly. And on the flip side, having too many red blood cells, a condition called polycythemia, can also cause problems. The blood can become too thick, making it harder for the heart to pump.
So it's all about balance. Too much or too little of anything can throw things off.
Absolutely. And blood is a perfect example of how interconnected and finely tuned our bodies are.
Wow, this deep dive has really opened my eyes to the complexity and importance of blood. It's not just some red liquid, it's a vital tissue that's constantly working to keep us alive.
And it's pretty amazing when you think about it.
It really is. So, listeners, I want you to think about this. Knowing all you now know about blood, how do you imagine your body would adapt if you move to a high-altitude environment where oxygen is scarce? What changes would your blood need to undergo to keep you going? That's something to ponder. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of blood. Keep those brains curious.